Nazi genocide caused Jews to be totally blinded, and that they readily forsook their heritage of tolerance. It's almost as though the Holocaust has finished the Jews.
Well, I think one's got to remember a number of things about that. Firstly, although we speak about the Holocaust as if it was a uniquely Jewish event, of course it was not. Socialists, gypsies, Slavs died in the camps just as the Jews did as well.
In fact, it was 6 million and another 6 million, wasn't it?
Indeed. The second thing to remember is that the Holocaust is not unique in terms of genocide. I mean, you have to look at more recent events in Darfur.
There's been 70 or so since, yeah?
Indeed, indeed. What was unique about the Holocaust is, if you like, its rationality, its scientificity, the business of the gas chambers and so on. And that makes it a unique scar on European history. But where I don't like that statement is it implies that there was some special role for the Jews, or some special way in which Jews were prior to the Holocaust that they are not now. And this is a sort of chosen people argument, which is sort of both, if you like, said by Jews and said by anti-Semites as well, with a sort of reverse sense of meaning to it. What troubles me is the way, enormously, and I think it troubles a lot of people, is the way in which Israel is so quick to play the Holocaust card when any of its activities are criticised.
Stephen, if we can go back to where we came in, I think we're both agreeing that most Israelis and most Jews have been brainwashed by Zionist propaganda. I believe that Jewish action is critical for this reason. I don't think any American president is ever going to use the leverage he has to require Israel to be serious about peace unless he feels that the majority of America's Jews are with him, will support him. So again, I ask the question, what specifically can be done to unwash those Jewish brains that have been brainwashed?
As a neuroscientist, I hate the term brainwashing, I have to actually say. I mean, I know what you mean, but I don't think it's going to work that way anyhow. I think it will only work that way unless and until the oil crisis, therefore the increasing demands of the Arab states, and of course an increasingly powerful equivalent Arab or Palestinian lobby in the United States can actually begin to counteract the power of AIPAC. That is, I think particularly in the US, where there is a desperate ignorance about world affairs in the majority, at least, of the non-East Coast or non-West Coast population, where the Jewish lobby is, the Israeli lobby, the Zionist lobby is so deeply embedded, and the power of it is so great, right the way through a whole range of the American media, through money and so on. You need a countervailing lobby. And I think there's a sense that that countervailing lobby might be beginning to develop. But I don't think you'll change the minds of the majority of those American Zionist Jews who are deeply involved in those lobbies.
But is it not true? I've seen polls that would suggest that AIPAC, the principal umbrella lobby organization, it probably represents no more than 27% of American Jews.
Well, I have no idea whether that's true or not, but the fact is quite clearly from that, beautifully documented by Mearsheimer and Walt in their book about the lobby recently, from which I think most of us, or most of people like myself, draw our knowledge. I mean, I'm not an expert in this. You're asking a neuroscientist to comment about politics, and I'm not a politician, I'm not a sociologist or a historian. I do care about justice, but it seems to me that the power of that lobby is there because it's incredibly well organized, because whatever percentage of American Jews it actually involves, it has a good deal of money, and it's got money which it has a great deal of experience in actually sort of being distributed in terms of how you influence congressional votes, what can and cannot be said. And you saw immediately the way in which, at least in the run-up to the November election in the States, the Democratic candidates were committed to making statements about Israel, whether they believed them or not, to which they will be held account.
You cannot run for office in America unless you kiss the bottom of the Zionist lobby.
I suspect that's true, but we also have to remember here that Gordon Brown is a patron of the Jewish National Fund, that he has gone on record as how passionately pro-Israel he is, and that may also, of course, not just be about his recognition of the power of an Israeli lobby here, which is negligible, I think, in terms of British politics. It's not the same at all, but an ideological commitment on his part as having come out of a sort of Church of Scotland background.
Yes, indeed.
You would know more about that than I would, I
No, I
expect.
think you're right. Some other matters.
Yeah.
So if you really think that the only way that the power of the Zionist lobby in America can be broken is by another new lobby, which by definition is almost an Arab lobby, Gentile lobby, I think there is no chance of that happening, so I would be totally pessimistic.
I think that there are very few grounds for optimism in the current situation. The one big positive thing that I see as happening, and of which our boycott movement is a part, is a worldwide move which is taking place in the churches, in the trade unions, in Britain, elsewhere in Europe, most recently in Ireland, in Canada, even in the United States, to begin to develop a civil movement of boycott of Israel, which is the precursor, just as it was in the case of South African apartheid, of the movement for boycott, divestment and sanctions, which ultimately was instrumental in the fall of the apartheid regime. And I think that this has to be a civil movement. It has to come from the population as a whole, and I see it happening. The immense significance of the boycott movement is not so much that it immediately destabilizes the Israeli economy, although that's to a small degree happening. It is firstly that it empowers civil society amongst the Palestinians themselves, so that they feel there are movements outside Palestine which are in support. And also the ways in which the strength of the movement, the cultural boycott, the refusal of leading artists and actors to go to participate in Israel, of academics to go to conference in Israel, and so on. Now the movements for divestment in the churches, the resolutions by big trade union branches, including now the Irish Trade Union Congress, calling for boycott and divestment. These are beginning to conscientize, if you like, Europe and America, and in doing so they have to begin to actually sort of feed through into putting pressure on Israel.
The immense significance of the boycott movement, Stephen Rose said, is the fact that it empowers civil society, the population as a whole, to act. In other words, if governments won't act to secure justice for the Palestinians, the citizens of nations could. That's all for this week. From this heart to yours, good night.